Welcome to LexTalks Legal Topics Simplified.
I love that tagline.
We try to keep it simple, right?
Yeah.
So today we're going to be going into some key legal concepts, I think, that are super important for law students, especially judicial doctrines.
Oh, absolutely.
And so think of these like secret code that unlocks how courts think,
Yeah.
especially when they're reviewing what government's doing.
I like that.
So we have three on deck for you today.
Okay.
The Doctrine of Legitimate Expectation, the Doctrine of Proportionality, and the Doctrine of Public Accountability.
Sounds good.
Ready to decode.
Absolutely.
All right, so judicial doctrines, these are, fundamental to understanding how the law balances the power of authorities.
Yeah.
Right, with individual rights. And I think it's all about making sure things are fair and reasonable, even when the government's involved.
Right, and that the government is acting within the bounds of the law.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so let's start with this. Does the government have to stick to its promises?
Oh, that's a good one.
Right.
Yeah.
That's where I think the Doctrine of Legitimate Expectation gets interesting.
It does get interesting.
So tell us more about this.
Sure.
What is it?
So if the government has consistently done something or made a clear promise, people start to rely on that. And that sort of creates an expectation of how things will work.
Right.
So the Doctrine of Legitimate Expectation says that, courts should consider this expectation
Okay.
when they're judging whether a government action was lawful.
Okay, so even if it wasn't like written down in some fancy legal document,
Exactly.
the government can't just like all of a sudden switch things up
Right.
without considering how it impacts people.
Yes. It's all about fairness and preventing arbitrary decisions.
I see.
So, let's say a local authority has always granted permits for street vendors to operate in a certain area.
Okay.
And then all of a sudden they decide to ban all vendors without any prior warning or solid reason.
Yeah.
The courts might look at that and be like, hold on.
Yeah, that's not right.
That's not fair to the vendors who have, based their livelihood on this practice.
Yeah, that makes sense because it's like that time in law school, when the professor said we weren't going to have a final.
Uh-huh.
And then, bam, surprise final.
Total betrayal.
Total betrayal.
Yeah.
So, it highlights why the Doctrine of Legitimate Expectation matters. It's ensuring that authorities don't pull the rug out from under people, right?
Exactly.
Who've been acting in good faith.
Yeah.
So it's not a guarantee,
Right.
but it's a factor the courts will consider.
Yeah.
It's about keeping things predictable and preventing those gotcha moments from the government.
Right.
So this isn't just theoretical.
No, it's not theoretical at all.
It's like real cases.
It pops up in real cases all the time.
Yeah. Give us an example of one.
So there's a classic case, GNCT, of Delhi v. Naresh Kumar from India.
Okay.
And it was about someone relying on an authority's usual way of handling licenses. And the Delhi High Court was like, while this expectation wasn't a legal right, you can't just ignore it.
Okay.
You need to consider it to be fair.
So it's like a nudge to the authorities to be consistent and predictable.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, I want to ask our listeners out there, have you ever had a situation where you felt like you had a legitimate expectation based on something the government has done in the past?
Yeah, could be zoning laws, scholarship applications, it happens all the time.
It's worth thinking about.
Yeah, it is.
So it's not a guarantee,
Yeah.
but it's at least a factor that the courts will consider.
Right.
So just because an expectation exists doesn't mean it's automatically legitimate.
Exactly.
It has to be reasonable, logical, and based on consistent actions, not just like a one-off thing.
Right. It has to be legitimate.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've talked about legitimate expectation, which is about fairness based on past actions. But what about making sure the government's current actions are appropriate? That's where the Doctrine of Proportionality comes in, right?
Right.
So tell us about that.
So it's like, is the punishment fitting the crime?
Okay.
But instead of crime, we're talking about any government action.
Got it.
So is what they're doing too extreme for the problem that they're trying to solve?
So it's not about whether they can do something.
Right.
It's whether they're going overboard.
Right.
Like using a chainsaw to trim your fingernails.
Perfect analogy.
Okay.
That's the heart of proportionality.
Got it.
So imagine a city council deciding to bulldoze an entire neighborhood just to widen a road a little bit.
Okay, now that's an image.
Right.
That's going to stick.
That would be a very disproportionate response.
Okay, so what are some real-world situations where this comes up?
It comes up a lot.
Yeah, because I feel like that could be pretty subjective.
It can be subjective, for sure.
Like what's proportionate to one person might not be proportionate to someone else.
Right, but the courts look for a balance.
Okay.
So a good example is R.V. Secretary of State for the Home Department in the UK.
Okay.
And the court looked at a deportation order and was like, was this too harsh?
Yeah.
You know, given this person's circumstances.
I see.
So it's about making sure the government's response is in line with the situation.
Interesting. So it's like a check on the government's power.
Exactly.
Making sure they're not swinging that power around like a wrecking ball.
Exactly.
When a gentle tap would do.
Right.
Now, India has landmark cases too, right?
Yes, they do.
On this doctrine.
The Supreme Court, in the case of Indian Express Newspapers v. Union of India, stressed that proportionality is especially important when freedom of speech is at stake.
Okay.
You can't just shut down someone's right to speak their mind.
Right.
Without a really compelling reason.
Yeah, silencing dissenting voices just because you don't like what they're saying.
Right.
That's disproportionate.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this seems applicable in so many areas.
It is.
I mean, environmental regulations, disciplinary actions in school.
Yeah.
Can you think of a time when you felt like a rule or punishment was way too harsh?
Oh, absolutely.
For the situation?
All the time.
That's proportionality in action.
That's it.
So it's all around us, making sure that authorities don't overreach and their actions are in line with the issue at hand.
Right.
So we've covered how past actions can create expectations.
Yeah.
And how current actions need to be proportionate.
Mm-hmm.
But what about making sure those in power are actually answerable for what they do?
Right.
This is where our final doctrine comes in.
Okay.
Public accountability, and this feels super relevant in today's world.
It is.
Where transparency is becoming more and more important.
Absolutely.
So tell us about this.
So it goes beyond just transparency.
Okay.
The core idea here is that anyone with public power, whether it's a government official, a judge, you know, even a school board member, they're not doing their own thing.
Right.
They are serving the public. And that means they need to be answerable.
They need to answer for their actions.
For their actions.
So it's like they're holding this power in trust for the people.
Exactly.
Not for their own personal gain.
Right. Okay.
And that trust comes with responsibilities.
Audit.
So they need to act openly.
Okay.
Explain their decisions and be ready for scrutiny.
Yeah.
And if they mess up, there should be consequences.
This reminds me of that case with the Medical Council of India, where the president was accused of shady dealings.
Yes.
People were outraged because it just felt like a complete lack of accountability.
Yeah, that was a big one.
Yeah.
That case highlighted the importance of this doctrine.
Right.
Because there was a big push after that.
Yeah.
For more transparency.
Yeah, it was a wake-up call.
Yeah.
And this isn't just limited to government. I mean, this idea of transparency and accountability is important in any organization.
Yeah, think about professional organizations.
Businesses.
Business.
Even like your own friend groups. Yeah, your friend groups.
Right.
Openness and accountability build trust.
It's like whether it's a government official making decisions affecting millions of people.
Right.
Or, you know, a student council president planning a bake sale.
Yeah.
This doctrine reminds us that power should always be used responsibly and ethically.
Yeah.
Okay?
Big stuff.
Yeah, pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah.
So we've laid the groundwork with these three doctrines.
Mm-hmm.
Legitimate expectation, proportionality, and public accountability.
Mm-hmm.
But we're just getting started.
We are just getting started.
In the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore how these doctrines play out in real-world scenarios and why they're so important.
Can't wait.
For your future legal careers.
I'm ready.
So don't go anywhere.
Stay tuned. It's fascinating how these doctrines, while we've looked at them kind of individually, they're all interconnected.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, they work together to create a framework for good governance.
So it's not like they're separate boxes. It's more like pieces of a puzzle that fit together.
Precisely. I see.
So think about legitimate expectation and proportionality.
Okay.
Let's say a university has a long-standing policy of giving students a chance to appeal their grades.
Oh.
And then all of a sudden they decide to scrap the appeals process entirely.
That doesn't sound very fair.
Right.
To the students who are relying on that policy.
Exactly. That could be a violation of legitimate expectation.
I see.
And plus, getting rid of the appeals process entirely, that seems like a pretty drastic response.
Yeah.
Especially if there haven't been any major problems with it.
Yeah.
So it might even fail the proportionality test.
Ah, I see what you mean.
Right.
It's like a double whammy.
Yeah.
Breaking a promise and overreacting.
Exactly.
And wouldn't both of those things also raise questions about the university's accountability?
Absolutely. When authorities act in ways that seem unfair or disproportionate, people start to lose trust.
Right.
And it makes you wonder, are they really acting in our best interests?
Right.
Are they being transparent about their decision-making? It erodes that trust,
It does.
which is the foundation of any healthy relationship, I would say.
Yeah.
Whether it's between a government and its citizens,
Right.
or even a professor and their students.
Or a company and its employees.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So that's why these doctrines are so important.
Exactly. They provide a framework for holding those in power accountable.
Yeah.
And making sure they're using their power responsibly.
Okay, so we've got the what of these doctrines down.
Right.
But let's talk about the why.
Okay.
Why should we as law students really care about all of this?
Right.
How does it connect to our future careers?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Whether we're aiming for the courtroom corporate law, even public interest work.
These doctrines might seem theoretical, but they're really woven into the fabric of almost every area of law.
Okay.
So let's say you're working on a corporate merger.
Okay.
You're going to need to understand how regulatory agencies operate their decision-making processes. And what happens if a company feels like a decision was unfair?
So even in the corporate world, these doctrines are lurking in the background.
Absolutely. And if you think about litigation,
Okay.
let's say you're representing a client who was injured because of a faulty product.
Okay.
You might need to consider whether a government agency failed to properly regulate that product. And that could be a violation of the Doctrine of Proportionality if their regulations were too lax.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Right.
So it is more relevant than I initially thought.
And in public interest law, forget about it.
Yeah.
These doctrines are your bread and butter.
Okay.
You know, if you're fighting for social justice, challenging government policies that are harmful,
Yeah.
understanding these doctrines is essential.
So whether we're drafting contracts, arguing in court, or advocating for change, these principles are kind of always at play.
They are. They're not just abstract concepts. They
Yeah.
have real-world implications for how the law is applied and how justice is served.
So it's not just about passing exams. No.
It's about understanding the tools.
Exactly.
We need to actually practice law
Yeah.
effectively.
Right.
But the legal world is not standing still, is it?
No, it's not.
It feels like things are changing so fast.
They are changing very fast.
With technology and global issues.
Right.
All of that.
Everything else going on.
And as the legal landscape evolves, these doctrines become even more important,
Okay.
I think.
Why is that?
Well, because we're in uncharted territory
Yeah.
with things like artificial intelligence, data privacy, the impact of social media on everything.
Right.
Right? These are areas where we're going to need to apply these principles to make sure that the law keeps up with the times.
Yeah, it's like we're not just learning about the law. We're becoming part of its evolution.
Exactly.
It's kind of exciting and a little intimidating at the same time.
It's both.
Yeah.
It's a huge responsibility,
Yeah.
but it's also incredibly empowering.
Yeah.
We get to shape how the law responds to these challenges
Yeah.
using these core principles as our guide.
So we've talked about how these doctrines work, why they matter.
Right.
But let's get real. No legal principle is perfect, right?
Sure, of course not.
There are always different perspectives and debates.
Right, and it's healthy to question and critique,
Yeah.
even fundamental principles like these.
Yeah.
Law is rarely black and white.
Right.
There are always nuances and gray areas.
So what are some of the critiques you've heard about these doctrines?
Oh, yeah,
Where do the debates lie?
So a common critique of legitimate expectation is that it can be subjective.
Okay.
What seems like a reasonable expectation to one person might not be to another.
Right. One person's clear promise is another person's casual comment.
Exactly.
Oh, that could get messy.
It can.
Yeah.
And that vagueness can lead to inconsistencies
Okay.
in how it's
So
applied.
it's not just a philosophical debate.
Mm,
It has real consequences
Yeah.
for how people interact with the legal system.
exactly.
Now, what about proportionality? Does that face any pushback?
It does some argue that it gives judges too much power.
Okay.
They worry that judges will substitute their own judgments for the expertise of the agencies or authorities.
Oh, so it's like that classic tension between different branches of government.
It is.
Who gets the final say?
Exactly. And, you know, when you're dealing with complex issues like environmental regulations or economic policy,
Yeah.
it can be tough for judges to have all the expertise.
Right. It's like asking a fish to climb a tree.
Right. They each have their strengths.
Yeah.
So it's about finding that balance.
So what about public accountability?
Yeah.
Any controversies there?
The biggest challenge with public accountability is that it can be tricky to define and enforce.
Okay.
What exactly does it mean to be accountable?
Right.
And how do you actually hold someone accountable in a system with so many layers?
It's like a big knot you're trying to untangle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Who's responsible when things go wrong?
Right.
Plus, there's the question of remedies.
Hmm.
Is a slap on the wrist enough when someone abuses their power? Or do we need harsher consequences? There's
Right.
no easy answer.
And hasn't technology made this whole accountability thing even more complicated?
It really has.
Yeah.
It's been a double-edged sword, I think.
Okay.
On the one hand, it's easier than ever to expose wrongdoing
Right.
and hold those in power responsible.
Yeah.
You know, we have citizen journalism, social media campaigns. These can be really powerful tools for change.
It's like everybody has a megaphone now.
Exactly. But the flip side is that it's also easier than ever to spread misinformation
Oh, yeah.
and create this culture of online shaming
Right.
that can lead to unfair accusations, damage people's reputations.
Without due process.
Without due process, exactly.
It's a tricky balance.
It is a tricky balance.
Yeah, so it's not just about having more information.
Yeah.
It's about using that information responsibly.
Responsibly.
Ethically.
And ethically, exactly.
I think that's something that's really important for not just legal professionals,
That's right.
but for everyone.
For everyone, yeah, we're all part of this evolving landscape.
Right.
We need to be mindful of how we use these powerful tools.
All right, so we've explored kind of the critiques, the complexities surrounding these doctrines. I don't want to leave our listeners feeling overwhelmed, though.
No.
Let's put it back down to earth and talk about how these principles play out in real-life situations.
Yeah, let's get specific.
Yeah.
Let's walk through some scenarios
Okay.
that might be relevant to you as law students.
We'll do it. I'm all ears.
Put on your lawyer hats.
Okay, so let's say you're interning at a legal aid clinic, and a client comes in who's been denied housing benefits.
Okay.
They've been relying on these benefits for years,
Mm-hmm.
but suddenly they're cut off with very little explanation.
Right.
How could the doctrine of legitimate expectation help in this situation?
So if your client meets all the eligibility criteria and there's been no change in their circumstances, they might have a legitimate expectation of continuing to receive those benefits,
I see.
especially if the agency hasn't given them a clear reason for the denial
Hmm.
or a chance to appeal the decision.
So it's about holding the agency accountable for its past practices and making sure they don't just yank the rug out from under someone who's depending on those benefits.
Exactly.
Oh.
And you know what? If the agency does give a reason, but it seems totally unreasonable, like they deny the benefits because your client was 5 minutes late to an appointment once.
That does not sound right.
Right.
That sounds like a classic case for the doctrine of proportionality.
Exactly.
Denying someone's livelihood
Right.
over a minor infraction.
Way too harsh.
Too harsh.
You can argue that the punishment doesn't fit the crime, so to speak.
Okay.
It's about ensuring that the agency's response is balanced and doesn't infringe on the individual's rights more than necessary.
Okay, so we've got legitimate expectation and proportionality covered.
Mm-hmm.
But what about public accountability? How might that play into this scenario?
So what if the agency has a history of being opaque in their decision-making process?
Okay.
Maybe they don't provide clear guidelines for eligibility,
Mm-hmm.
or they make it really difficult for people to access information about their rights.
That raises a red flag.
Yeah, if they're not being transparent about how they operate,
Yeah.
it makes it hard to hold them accountable for their actions.
Exactly. And that's where tools like the Right to Information Act
Yes.
can be really useful.
Exactly.
You could help your client file a request
Right.
to try to uncover what's going on behind the scenes.
Exactly.
So it's about using the law to shed light on the agency's actions and make sure they're operating in a fair and accountable way.
Precisely. And remember, even if these doctrines don't always lead to, a slam dunk win in court,
Right.
just raising these arguments can put pressure on authorities to act more fairly and transparently.
Yeah, it's about using the law as a tool for positive change, even when the odds are stacked against you.
Absolutely. And that's what makes these doctrines so powerful. They empower individuals
Yeah.
to stand up for their rights
Yeah.
and challenge abuses of power.
Wow. I'm already feeling inspired to go out there and fight for justice.
Yes.
But before we wrap up, I want to acknowledge that these doctrines, while essential, aren't without their limitations.
Right. It's important to be aware of the boundaries
Yeah.
so we can use them strategically and effectively.
So what are some key limitations that we should keep in mind?
Well, for starters, they primarily apply to public authorities,
Okay.
not private individuals or companies.
So if you're dealing with a dispute between two private parties.
Yeah, these doctrines might not be directly relevant.
Which like different sets of rules.
Different playing fields, yeah.
Different playing fields.
Exactly. And even when dealing with public authorities, there are situations where these doctrines might have limited application. For instance, if there's a very clear law that overrides someone's legitimate expectation, the courts might be hesitant to intervene.
So it's not like these doctrines trump everything else.
Right. They operate within a broader legal framework.
They operate within the broader legal framework.
Exactly. And it's also important to remember that these doctrines aren't self-executing.
Okay.
Just because you think a situation violates one of these principles doesn't mean you automatically win.
Right.
You need to build a strong legal argument.
Okay.
Supported by evidence-persuasive reasoning.
It's like building a case brick by brick.
Exactly.
Carefully crafting your arguments and anticipating those potential counter-arguments.
And even then, there's no guarantee of victory.
Right.
The courts have a degree of discretion.
Of course.
And the outcome of any case depends on a myriad of factors.
So it's not a magic bullet.
No.
But a powerful tool in the legal arsenal.
Right.
That needs to be used thoughtfully and strategically.
Absolutely. And finally, it's crucial to recognize that these doctrines are constantly evolving.
That's true.
As society changes and new challenges emerge, the courts are continuously refining and reinterpreting these principles.
That's like they're living, breathing concepts.
Exactly.
Adapting to the changing legal landscape.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so exciting. As future legal professionals, you have the opportunity to contribute to this evolution using your knowledge and skills to shape the law for the better.
It's a pretty awesome responsibility when you think about it.
It is.
We're not just inheriting the legal system, we're shaping it.
Right.
For future generations.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So as you continue your legal journey, keep exploring, keep questioning.
Yes.
And keep pushing the boundaries of these crucial doctrines.
Absolutely.
Because at the end of the day, it's not just about winning cases.
Yeah.
It's about using the law to create a more just and equitable world.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to end on.
Thanks for joining us on LexTalks for this deep dive into judicial doctrines.
My pleasure.
We hope you found it insightful, engaging, and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
Absolutely.
And remember, this is just the beginning. There's a whole universe of legal concepts out there waiting to be explored.
So much more to learn.
So keep learning, keep questioning, and keep using your legal superpowers to make a positive impact on the world.
And we'll see you next time.
And don't forget to subscribe to LexTalks for more deep dives into the fascinating world of law.
See you soon.
We'll see you next time.